I always equate land to your children. Your children get on your nerves, but you never get rid of them. And land is the same way. It can get on your nerves. But your land, like your children, you don't get rid of. And you learn to love them in different ways because that's a part of you, particularly when you have generational land. It's as important as the blood that flows through your veins every day. The land is important.
Welcome to the Roots to Resilience podcast, a series highlighting the powerful stories and transformative efforts defining the past, present, and future of African American land ownership. I'm Bethany Wilkinson, your host and executive director of the Sustainable Forestry and African American Land Retention Network. At the SFLR Network, we are committed to empowering African American landowners through education, advocacy, and sustainable forestry practices that protect generational land, foster economic resilience, and honor the rich cultural heritage tied to the land. This series will take you on a journey through 8 sites across our network, uncovering the stories, challenges, and triumphs that define our mission. Today, I am joined by Ebonie Alexander, the Executive Director of the Black Family Land Trust, and a woman whose work in Virginia exemplifies our mission at SFLR.
I'm Ebonie Alexander, Executive Director of the Black Family Land Trust. The Black Family Land Trust is one of the only land trusts dedicated to the preservation and protection of African American and other historically underserved populations' land assets.
I've known Ebonie for about a year, and in that time, she has quickly become one of my favorite people to talk with about the intersection of policy, community, and land preservation. She brings a wealth of experience and passion to this work, rooted in a personal and professional journey that's all about honoring and preserving the land and its legacy.
We see land as an asset, and it should be a performing asset for current and future generations.
In this episode, Ebonie reflects on her upbringing as the daughter of a farmer, a journey that sparked her passion for land conservation and her dedication for advocating for policies that address systemic barriers to land retention. She also walks us through the African American land ethic, the philosophical framework that guides the efforts at the Black Family Land Trust. Let's get right into it. Well, thanks for being willing to participate in this project.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to just the public and our donors and partners and maybe even some landowners hearing more about SFLR's story. To start, could you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to lead the Black Family Land Trust?
Oh, my goodness. That's a very circuitous route. My educational background is in public administration and nonprofit management. I came to the BFLT about 15 years ago after working for 14 years in community-based economic development for a statewide intermediary doing affordable housing. And it was during that time that, because we were developing affordable housing, I was seeing the loss of farmland for housing in rural places. And that became a kind of in the back of my mind concern that we were losing farmland. I am the daughter of a farmer. Although he left the farm when he was young, he replicated it in our little community where I grew up in Maryland. And we had chickens at one point, and we had ducks. Daddy had a garden that was about maybe an acre, a little bit more. And I learned so much from my dad about the land and why it was so important. So when the opportunity came with the BFLT, the board asked me to come to the position. It seemed like a really logical next step for me. And it will be where I end my professional career. And it's work that I love every single solitary day. I don't feel like it's work. You hear that cliche a lot, but for me, this is a real passion that I have, protecting land.
Something that you mentioned that stuck out to me was you learned from your dad about loving land. I'm wondering, was there a defining moment or experience that solidified your commitment to this work, building on those lessons from your father?
There just were a combination of things. Growing up, if we were riding in the car and someone threw trash or paper out of the window, he would stop the car and make you pick up that piece of paper and all the other paper around, because you don't soil the earth. It just got instilled in me, and he practiced what he preached. He farmed that piece of land that we had that I grew up on, and he didn't use chemicals. We had a composting pile, which I didn't know until 2006 that composting was a conservation method. It was just something that Daddy did, and he said his daddy did it. That's why I did it. We recycled everything. If you were to walk through my house now, you would think that I was a crazy person, because when you grow up with farmers, everything has another value. You just don't toss it out. You save the glass jars. You save the netting that the onion bag comes in, because you never know when you're going to need that. You don't just throw out things. And then he never used chemicals. We saved the ashes from the fireplace. The only thing he used was lime. Later on, I remember him using a lot of black pepper for things, but there were no harsh chemicals used in anything. I know that has led to my understanding of the land and respect that we have to live in tandem with the land. We can't control it. That came from him. Part of what I say at the BFLT, part of our philosophy is, if you make your land human, you will take care of it differently. I always equate land to your children. You know, your children get on your nerves, but you never get rid of them. And land is the same way. It can get on your nerves. A tree will fall. Like right now, the leaves are falling everywhere. I just cleaned my front porch off on Monday, and it's ankle deep again in leaves. That gets on your nerves. But your land, like your children, you don't get rid of. You just keep them, and you learn to love them in different ways. And when you make it human, you treat it differently. Just as you wouldn't feed your children potato chips and Coke for breakfast every day, you're not going to do things to have your soils unbalanced. You're not going to use harsh chemicals on your land. You're not going to cut down too many trees. You're going to treat it like it's human, because that's a part of you. And it's so much a part of you, particularly when you have generational land. It's as important as the blood that flows through your veins every day. The land is important.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts about your work at the Black Family Land Trust is the African American land ethic. And I feel like what you were just describing embodies so much of that ethic, because you're emphasizing that cultural significance of the land, of culture, of land ownership, of stewardship, of family. Can you tell us more about this African American land ethic, what it is, and how you developed it?
Sure. The land ethic grew out of some research we were doing on creating new programs when I first came to the BFLT. And we were doing R&D in North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, and New York. In conversations with young people, we were asking them, where does your food come from? Well, people, particularly the younger people in New York, they could get the food to the grocery store. Then they didn't know where it came from. It came off the truck. In the South, a lot of the children knew more about where the food came from, but they didn't want to be a part of the food system growing it. Our challenge was, how do we create something for the next generation to understand and appreciate land ownership and to see agriculture as a viable option for careers? And one of the things in our elevator speech for the BFLT, we say that land is a performing asset, and it should be a performing asset for current and future generations. So a colleague and I got together. Both of us are historians in our own way. And we created what was originally entitled Demystifying Land Ownership in African American Communities. And it evolved into the land ethic. It starts with the Middle Passage, and it comes forward to today. It starts with teaching people that slavery was not an issue that we as African Americans should have any shame in. There was no one standing on the shores waving, "Come steal me, chain me to a boat, take me to someplace that I don't know." So the next piece to it that comes is looking at what value African Americans gave pre-emancipation. We use documents like declarations of successions from the states that succeeded from the Union. Mississippi says that it would lose $4 billion if it had to give up slavery. Then we move into how we acquired land as African Americans. And that's where the story gets real for people who live on generational land or who have heirs property. Then they could begin to see their connection to the past, to the present. And then we start talking about what was the pride in that land. How did your family come to acquire that land? Did you homestead? Did you buy it? Was it given to you? All of that becomes important because how you got the land is so important to how you see the land. We have one family where the wife would go to New York every year for 9 months and serve as a live-in maid. And she sent all her money home. And that was the money that her husband used to pay off the farm. When you hear those stories, you connect with them in a real way.
And can you elaborate on how these narratives serve to connect families and communities to a deeper understanding and appreciation of this land ethic?
For the families, they start to connect. And then we talk about land loss and how we went from 15 to 19 million acres in the 1920s to today owning less than 2 million acres as a people. A landless people as a powerless people. But I think the most important part and where we see a change in attitude when we're doing the land ethics, one is when you talk about the economy, and the other point is when we begin the conversation about entrepreneurship. One of the things that was important to me and to our board when I came was let's change the language. Let's not talk about farming. Let's talk about agricultural enterprises. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. Those are terms that younger people resonate with. That was something they understood. And then we start to talk to the elders. In talking with the elders, we help them build their family's history. We want that family to connect to that land. And that's how we build that family's land ethic. Each family has their own land ethic that they can resonate with, that they can pass to the next generation. Part of our motto is, as a people, we can't afford to lose another blade of grass or grain of sand. We've got to keep all that we have, and now we're about building again. So in doing that, we transfer that negative sense associated with slavery to pride in being landowners, to pride in being able to be a producer, to entrepreneurship, and to your family's history and culture. All of that comes into that land ethic. You see your land as being human. You see it as being a part of who you are. This land represents your family.
Absolutely. One of the unfortunate stats that comes to mind when you mention that we cannot afford to lose another blade of grass or grain of sand is that between 1910 and 1997, there was a 90% decline in African American-owned farmland. It's our present reality and our mission at SFLR Network to preserve African American land. So tying this all back to SFLR Network, we are the Sustainable Forestry and African American Land Retention Network, and the F is for forestry. What role does forestry play in your work at the Black Family Land Trust?
African Americans, because of the size of our farms now, have small forests. I had a leaf collection growing up, and we would label where they came from. And my mother's position was, a tree is a tree. They're all brown at the bottom and green at the top. I don't know why you two keep going on about these trees. So many of my landowners see trees the same way, or they see it as firewood. They didn't see them as forest. And that's the beauty of our work at SFLR, is that we're helping people have healthy family forests because they didn't see them as forests. They think of trees as once, maybe twice in a lifetime crop that they could sell. You don't see them as something that you farm like you would tobacco or cotton or corn. It just takes a longer process, but it's something that you farm. So being a member of SFLR has afforded us an opportunity at the BFLT to work specifically with landowners who have trees, to bring to them the knowledge and expertise on tree farming, something that most people don't realize you do, farm trees. It also has allowed us to bring additional information, education, and technical assistance on how you can combine tree farming with other agricultural operations, with agrotourism, with cultural activities. So we use the trees as the foundation for bringing other agricultural practices to those families, ones that they didn't see because they were just trees. That's the first level.
And what's the second level?
The second level is we're at our core a conservation and environmental organization, SFLR. When we protect trees, we're protecting clean air, we're protecting water. That's the secondary value of what we do. First is to help our families to keep this land as a performing asset with the trees intact, creating healthy family forests. The second is a broader environmental protection work of helping to ensure clean air, clean water, stopping erosion, all the other wonderful things that trees provide to communities and to families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I was grounded with having a love and respect for trees. My favorite tree in the whole world is a weeping willow.
They grow so fast and they're beautiful.
Whew. We had a huge weeping willow around in our backyard that it would take at least 3 people with their hands joined together to get around the tree. And it had these huge branches. And I remember as a kid, that was my escape route to the roof of the house because I could climb up the tree, walk across this branch, drop down on the porch, and then walk up the side of the house and sit at the roof of the house just to see. Now, I would always get in trouble for that, but it didn't stop me from doing it. But I loved that weeping willow tree. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
And it had the biggest roots. Oh, my gracious.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it sounds beautiful.
It was.
So we're going to switch gears to talk about policy work, which I know you are very passionate about. I'm curious to know what initially inspired you to begin focusing on policy work and preserving African American land ownership and heritage through policy.
I have always been a policy geek all my life. And one of the things that I understood is that people, particularly African Americans who have not always been a part of the system, end up being reactionary to policy. Most of the time, when we get involved in policy work, it's after the policy has been made law, not before the policy. So we didn't have a lot of, in my opinion, we didn't have a lot of input in how things were done. And when you start to look around a lot of different policies, I used to run shelters for homeless people. By the time the policy got down to us, we could have told the policymakers, no, that's not going to work. But we weren't involved at the beginning of it. So one of the things that intrigues me with the work we're doing now is that we have an opportunity to be proactive as opposed to reactive. So if we take the position that we need to be at the table when the policy is being discussed, then we know what the issues are around implementation of policy. We know the nuances of how something gets rolled out and how it impacts rural communities differently than it does urban communities, or whatever the policy issue is. That's what gets me going. So that's my start.
That makes a lot of sense. I also understand that through your work with the Black Family Land Trust, you've been instrumental in shaping and advancing several key policy initiatives. Could you share more about some of those efforts and their impact?
With BFLT, because our work is around land protection and making that land a performing asset, there are a number of policy initiatives. We were the lead organization in Virginia to get the Uniform Petition of Heirs Property passed. That's important because heirs property is one of the leading causes of land loss in the African American community. But heirs property is not an issue that just impacts African Americans. Heirs property impacts everyone. All you have to do is die without a will, and you've created heirs property. So that was a policy change that we were successful in doing. It was a wonderful coalition. It passed unanimously through every committee on both sides of the aisle, straight to the governor's desk.
Oh, that's incredible. Getting this law passed in Virginia was huge. And I want to step back a bit to break this down for people who may be less familiar with what all this really means. The Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act that you are referencing is basically a law that was designed to help families protect their inherited land, especially when that land has been passed down without a clear will or estate plan. It's important because without this law, heirs' property is super vulnerable. For example, if one family member decides to sell their share, someone from outside the family could swoop in, buy it, and force a sale of the whole property. And that's typically bad news because these forced sales often lead to families losing land that's been in their family for generations. So this law steps in to prevent that in a few ways. First off, it makes sure that if someone wants to sell their share, the other family members get the chance to buy it first, keeping the land in the family. It also requires the property to be appraised to determine its fair market value, making sure these families aren't taken advantage of and can hold on to what's theirs. So again, amazing work, Ebonie. I know that there are also other policy initiatives that you've been involved with, including your work towards establishing an Office of Small Farms in the USDA. Can you tell me more about that?
Senator Cory Booker introduced a bill in 23 to create an Office of Small Farms. We have been working with other organizations, particularly the American Farmland Trust and others, to get language into the farm bill whenever we get a farm bill. 70% of all farmers in this country are small acreage farmers. We define small acreage as 180 acres or less. Most importantly is they tend to get less than 40% of USDA resources. So here we have 70% of the farmers are small acreage farmers that get less than 40% of USDA resources. We learned in the pandemic the value of our small acreage farms. Those farms were able to stop and pivot on a dime and respond affirmatively to the food needs, the nutritional needs of their communities. You didn't see one small acreage farmer on the news saying that their distribution system had been disrupted, so they couldn't get the eggs to the market, so they were breaking them. They couldn't get the milk, or they couldn't get the... Everything small acreage farmers grew, they were able to sell and provide to their community. We need small acreage farmers as much as we need clean air and clean water. Everything can't be big.
Absolutely. It's essential to preserve and protect both our small farms and agricultural land to ensure sustainable food production. So on that note, the Black Family Land Trust aids landowners in establishing conservation easements, which are agreements that allow landowners to maintain ownership while preserving their land for agricultural purposes. Easements often bring advantages like tax benefits or direct payments to the landowner. Can you delve deeper into how these conservation easements work and the impact they have?
We work with our landowners to put easements on their ag land so that we will have ag land 100 years from now, 50 years from now. One of the stories we tell with Joe Thompson, who is a former tobacco farmer in North Carolina, took his tobacco buyout money and reinvented himself as a freshwater prawn producer, the giant shrimp, on the same land that he grew tobacco. So often people get sums of money and they'll go buy a new truck or they'll do something. Joe reinvested all of his money into his farm. Joe is the first easement on a farm that we did. It was the Farm and Ranchland Protection Program when Joe did it in 2012. We have an easement on his property. The proceeds from that easement, in typical Joe fashion, he purchased some land across the street, paid off all the farm debt, and he reinvested his money back into his agricultural operation. He has children who are involved. They all have careers and live in different parts of the country, but they are all invested in that farm. It has been a generational act in getting Joe to where he is. The children were a part of the discussions about the easement, so they understood what the easement does. I think to sum that up is that the day of closing, we had a big ceremony, and Joe said, as we were wrapping the ceremony up, that this easement to him was so important because when his time comes, he can lay his dead bones down to rest in peace, knowing that his land will always go to feed people. And that sums it all up.
That's such a powerful way to think about legacy. Looking to the future, what legacy do you hope the Black Family Land Trust and the policies that you're championing will leave for African American landowners and communities?
I want the legacy of the Black Family Land Trust. This is my personal desire, not necessarily the boards or staffs, but I want our legacy to be that our families are valued, that they feel important, that we heard them, and that we help them achieve their goal. Our job is to help families achieve their goal for their land, not our goal, but their goal. I want families to be able to say that we did that, and we did that with respect. We respected them, we respected their elders, we respected their land. I want them to be able to say that our staff was always kind and courteous, and that we appreciated and recognize that it is an honor for someone to allow you to come on to their most precious asset, their land, their most valuable asset, to help them achieve their goal. That's so important to us, and that we did it with dignity and we did it with pride and respect for them as the landowner.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ebonie, for opening up your work for us.
Thank you.
Ebonie's reflections remind us that land is far more than soil and trees. It's a living legacy and a cornerstone of community, culture, and sustainability. From her work in advancing conservation easements to championing policies like the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, Ebonie demonstrates the transformative power of connecting history, advocacy, and stewardship. As we close, let's carry forward the wisdom shared today. To see land as part of who we are, to protect it as we would a family member, and to champion its role in shaping a sustainable and equitable future. That's all for this episode with Ebonie Alexander, Executive Director of the Black Family Land Trust. Until next time, thank you for listening to Roots to Resilience. Roots to Resilience is a sustainable forestry and African American land retention network podcast. Our senior producer is Ivana Tucker. Our engineers are Asia Simpson and Jacob Winnick. Our executive producers are Melise Toussaint and Eliza Smith. This podcast was produced in collaboration with Cascade Advisory and Cosmic Standard. For more information about our work at SFLR Network, check us out at sflrnetwork.org and be sure to sign up for our email newsletter. Special thanks to our network sites and to the American Forest Foundation for supporting the podcast. This material is also based upon work supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this publication are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. Department of Agriculture or of our other sponsors. In addition, any reference to specific brands or types of products or services does not constitute or imply an endorsement for those products or services. I'm your host, Bethany Wilkinson, signing out.